I was having alcohol for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner. I became a very good alcoholic, which is not a badge to have honor with. I went from being alone to being absolutely lonely. Even though there were well-wishers around me, I couldn't connect with them. I started hating the way I was. The irony is the rock bottom was the launching pad for where I am today. Number one rule is to understand that negotiation actually is not about you. It's actually about the other party. You thought that by avoiding the conflict, you'll have harmony, but you don't. What you actually get is apathy.
Welcome back to another episode of Limitless. Today we have with us Sanjay Yadav. He's over in London. It's great to have you with us. How are you, Sanjay?
Very well. Thank you for having me, Nick.
It's a true pleasure. We know each other from the days when I met you over in Singapore, but now you're over in London. Is the springtime coming yet?
On paper, yes, but it's never going to be like Singapore. That's the problem we have in this part of the world. I still miss my Singapore days and the special guaranteed sun that we always have there.
Maybe you can negotiate your way through that as well, because to all listeners, Sanjay is an excellent negotiator who's helping people to become happier and also to have more energy in their life, right? Is that what you're working on these days, Sanjay?
That is correct. So the genuine belief is that if you are a skilled negotiator, you'll actually be a happier person.
Oh, really? How so?
So the reason is this, right? And all and I'll just give you a little bit of context. So I started doing negotiating skills related coaching. So this is an interactive session where we teach participants to just become better negotiators. Most of it, if not all, when we started, was in the commercial environment. And as we did hundreds of these workshops, etc., one thing that jumped out to me was that actually this particular skill is more of a life skill. It's a human skill. If you just understand how to resolve conflicts that are happening between people, between parties, it'll help you to become happier because you're not avoiding conflict. You're actually looking at conflict as an opportunity. So therefore, what happens is as a human, you're not stuck. You're not suffering. You're not feeling lonely because nobody's listening to your issues and you're not able to resolve them. You're actually saying, well, I know the skills to negotiate. Therefore, I am happy to face conflicts, whether they're relationship level, whether they're at the corporate level, and I know the skills to resolve them. Therefore, I have seen that people who are skilled negotiators are actually happier.
Well, I'm not surprised to hear this, Sanjay, because I read a study by Harvard, the biggest study on happiness by Robert Waldinger, and the conclusion there is healthy relationship makes you live longer and happier, period. And the dark side of that was if you have broken relationships, then it's as dangerous as smoking 14 cigarettes a day, they said. So I can certainly see why this is important. And maybe you can share a little bit more about how would someone then negotiate for love, for example?
Oh, that's a tough one. Just to put it out there, so I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychotherapist or a physiotherapist or any form of technical skills. What I am is someone who has been exposed to negotiating skills quite a lot, and I'm as a result aware of a little bit more about how this particular skill can actually be used. So how can you negotiate for love, especially in a long-term relationship where one person's purpose has evolved? And that's natural, right? We as human beings, our purposes are continuously evolving, but maybe the relationship's collective purpose hasn't evolved. So the question is to understand, number one rule, the general guidelines I give to everybody is to understand that negotiation actually is not about you. It's actually about the other party. It's highly likely that you will know what you want, or you should have done the inner work to find out what you want, understand why is it that you want it, and how is it you're going to go about achieving it. And the risk here is that if you don't align that with the other party, then you start creating a gap. Okay, so that gap starts to create a lack of communication between the two parties. It starts to create resentment between the two parties. And therefore, if you understand that negotiation is not actually about you, it's about we. It's about aligning what we want to do, even though my purpose has changed. And if you have that in mindset, you're more likely to come up with an alignment, even though your purpose is evolving as you are in that relationship.
Yeah, and resentment is the death for relationships, right? And it also is what leads us to anger, and to give men the most heart attacks come from anger and resentments. So to get those skills can not only be useful, but it can actually save our lives, can't it, Sanjay?
Absolutely. I mean, the thing I noticed a lot and I still continue to notice it, which is why this is a great opportunity to talk about it on your podcast, is a lot of people assume that if there is a conflict between two parties, and conflict, it sounds like a very dramatic word. Conflict can be just a disagreement. I want to do certain things in my life, or want to do a certain activity, and the other party does not, or does not believe in it in the same way. That's just a difference in opinion, which technically is a conflict from a negotiating point of view. What I've noticed is that when there's a conflict between two parties, they try actually to avoid resolving that conflict, thinking that if we just avoid it, maybe there'll be harmony between the two. Okay? But actually, that could be nothing from the truth. That is the furthest point you can be from the truth. What you're really looking to do is to understand the conflict and find ways you can resolve it. Because if you don't, as you rightly said, it leads to resentment, it leads to silent treatment, it leads to identity crisis, and I've even noticed it leads to all sorts of emotional as well as physical issues. Things like you start becoming more lonely, more depressed, more angry, you start becoming upset with what's happening around you. It changes you as a person, simply because you thought that by avoiding the conflict you'll have harmony, but you don't. What you actually get is apathy. In other words, the other person stops caring less and less about what's happening between us. And you don't want apathy. What you want is interest. People are interested in resolving the conflict. The issue is we don't have the skill. And if you learn that skill, you'll know that any time there is discrepancy, and it happens all the time, I have the skill to resolve it, and therefore maintain that relationship, maintain health for myself, mental, physical, emotional. I maintain it because I have a higher purpose and I have the skill to take me there.
Thank you, Sanjay, for sharing some great tips here for negotiation skills for our life. And may I ask, is there a reason why you're interested in this topic? Is it perhaps a story behind the scene, how you got into this, Sanjay?
So for me, negotiation came after the issue. So I wish I had it before, right? Which is why I'm out there telling people that learn this skill, because you'll always have conflict in life. Unfortunately for me, it came afterwards. So, I mean, to give you one example, and a personal example, I was living in Hong Kong. This is before Singapore time. Like most of your listeners, I'm sure, have very good corporate life, very successful, and then suddenly something happens. Okay, so I'd already done about 20 years of corporate life, doing very well in the different roles that I was working for some large organizations, and I suddenly ended up in a situation where lost in my job, felt lonely. That resulted in me losing the job, which meant now I'm sitting at home suddenly with no purpose, don't know direction to follow. And the classic mistake that I made, like and I've seen it around, is resorting to issues like alcohol. I started drinking. I became a very good alcoholic, which is not a badge to have honor with. I started drinking early in the morning. I was having alcohol for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner. Just basically lost. I started noticing, especially now when I look back, I started noticing that relationship of 10-year marriage started to become more and more distant. I went from being alone to being absolutely lonely. Even though there were well-wishers around me, I couldn't connect. Okay. It's just I didn't know how to resolve this conflict that I had, my purpose. What is the objective that I'm trying to achieve? All of this misalignment resulted in poor behavior. I did other things apart from negotiation, but when I look back on how I resolved this issue, if I had negotiating skills, even a small amount, I would have understood that there is a conflict in my objectives, my wishes, my purposes. Now I need to align them, because negotiation is an alignment issue. You're trying to align with a bigger purpose. That lacking skill, I didn't have a method, a structure on how to do it. I did it differently. I did it through sheer hate. I started hating the way I was. I started tolerating less and less the way I became. I am relatively quite well disciplined, so I started using my discipline to try and start with something small. I put a 3-step approach. I said, look, I'm going to focus something to do with my health, something to do with my physical health, mental health, and emotional health. And I did the simple stuff, right? It's simple, but it's not easy. I'm going to do a little bit of exercise. I'm going to start reducing my alcohol, not for breakfast, but maybe I'll start at lunch, just to start bringing it down slowly, etc. I seeked help from my wife I hear good things about meditation. Can you help me? How do I meditate? What are the techniques? I started with 5 minutes. I literally used to have an alarm clock that used to have 5 minute ticker on it saying, I'm only going to meditate for 5 minutes. But I did it every day. The consistency was key. And that's really what took me out. Got back into the corporate world, came across negotiation internally within the organization, did that for a few years, and I realized, my God, this thing is massive. I could do this as a life skill. And that's literally how the journey of negotiating started. So it really, the irony is the rock bottom was the launching pad for where I am today. So it's easier for me to say that don't be fearful of the rock bottom. But believe me, if you are in the rock bottom, then the direction of travel is a choice. And if you choose the right direction of travel with the right skill, you're absolutely on the right path.
Yeah, beautifully said, Sanjay, and thanks for your vulnerability and to share that. I think that gives hope to a lot of people. I hit also my rock bottom after leaving or crashing out of the corporate world, and while I'm looking back to it now, I wouldn't trade it for anything. I needed that. I had to become sick and tired of being sick and tired, so to say. And out of there, I could crawl out as well and build a life of meaning that I wanted. It seems like many of us are going through those challenges when we question our life, our purpose, and so on. And if anyone who's listening, Sanjay, who is in that space now, they are feeling lost. There's many of the listeners who I know have just been laid off from the work. Perhaps they've been 20, 30 years with the company. They find themselves there at home, feeling lonely, not sure what next. What advice would you give to them?
Look, I mean, I've already touched upon it. It's okay. It's okay that this is happening. In other words, this conflict that has now arisen in your life, right? If you can find a way to see that as an opportunity, and that's what I'm saying, that's the skill, is if you can find a way to see that as an opportunity, then conflict is an opportunity. And the key question now is, if you appreciate that this is an opportunity, then you will have a different mindset on how you're going to resolve that conflict. So you're no longer part of the conflict. You're now becoming part of the opportunity that will arise from that conflict. It is that mind shift. And the thing that worked for me was a higher purpose, right? And I'm not saying that corporate life is not good, but I felt that there was a higher purpose. There's got to be something more to this, right? And it's just in that 1% belief every day that there's got to be something more. So I'm going to go out and look for this opportunity. I'm going to seek it. And what I found that over time, the skills required, the people required to help you, they actually start emerging, right? And they've always been there, but because my mind shift has taken place, they are now part of the solution versus me being lone and lonely, being part of the problem.
So you've done the inner journey there. You have grown yourself, so you're better able to handle difficult conversation. Is what I'm hearing. Basically, is that the way we can describe it?
Yeah, and it's going to sound funny, but I actually look forward to conflict because the mindset for me, the conflict is an opportunity. So let me just take a step back. I mentioned to you, people avoid conflict, thinking that if I just avoid the conflict with Nick, then maybe there will be harmony between Nick and I, because we're not getting into conflict. We're just simply avoiding it. But actually, in reality, what happens is Nick's attitude towards me becomes more apathetic. So he doesn't care. He doesn't want to get involved in a conversation with me. He doesn't share his views with me. So I actually don't know what Nick is thinking because the communication has fallen out, right? What I'm saying is that if you recognize there's a conflict, then that means if Nick is still talking to you in that conflict, he's showing interest to why you need to think differently, Sanjay, even though there's a conflict. And the difference is the change in purpose. And I'm trying to align Nick with my purpose. And the fact that we are still talking in a conflict indicates that Nick is interested in resolving this conflict. So conflict is actually an opportunity because it signals to you that the other party is still talking to you because they're interested in resolving this issue. And if you know how to resolve the issue, which is through negotiation, you will start creating more and more alignment, even though the purpose is changing by one party versus the other. I hope that makes it clearer.
Yeah, very much so. Thank you for making it so easy to understand, Sanjay. And you spoke about purpose before. What would go wrong in a relationship when purpose is evolving, but the communication doesn't? What happens then?
Yeah, I mean, this is quite common, right? It's not just in work. It's actually very ubiquitous in our lives. The important thing to understand that purpose will change. So any agreement, even a relationship, is an implicit agreement, right? It's not written down anywhere, but it's understood between the two parties that, certain things will be done by you, certain things will be done by me. That's like a normal commercial agreement. You have terms and conditions. Relationships have the same. And if there is any changes to that agreement, in other words, there are terms and conditions or what's implicitly agreed has started to change, has started to evolve between one party versus another, that misalignment needs to be renegotiated. Okay. And if you don't renegotiate those misalignment, then you are creating that gap, that risk of apathy, the risk of silent resentment, etc. So it's important to understand that every relationship has some sort of an agreement. Those agreements may start to change over time, but it's important to recognize that these agreements are changing. So therefore, the new agreement has to be mutually negotiated so we can get an alignment on how we are operating. So the mindset we are moving away from is me, what I want, versus we, what we want. And it's negotiation that allows you to create the bridge. From moving from me, and you have done the inner work. I have to make the assumption you've done the inner work, allowing you to move from a me mindset to a we mindset. So you're going from this is what I want, but actually I need to understand with you what we want as a result, because there is a new requirement. My purpose has changed. There's a requirement. So I want you to come aligned with that requirement. And how do we do it? Negotiation is that bridge that allows you to me to we.
And I love that because it's fully aligned with coaching as well. We're looking for co-creating basically the solution together, which is sort of how I parent my teenage son. Rather than trying to see it as an argument or winning an argument, that we co-create a solution. Maybe you can share some tips how we can move from that winning an argument to co-creation.
Again, it starts with inner work. So let's not ever lose sight of that, right? Yeah. If you haven't done the inner work, in other words, you haven't done what is it that you want, why is it important to you, and how you're going to go about doing it. So you have your own inner conversation, you have your own inner dialogue. You have to create the what, why, and the how. What is it important? Why is it important to me? And how am I going to get it done? Once you've done that, it's very important to also become the other person in that conversation. Imagine I'm going to now have that conversation with Nick. What would Nick want from this discussion? Why is it that it's important to him? And how does Nick think I should get it done? So I'm already trying to visualize, understand prior to it happening, how it will happen. That's when you start going into the dialogue phase. You start having the discussion. And I always advise people, whenever you start a dialogue and a conversation where you know your purpose has changed and you're trying to align with the other party, is to always state the higher purpose at the beginning. So you're not going in that discussion to say, this is what I want. You're going in the discussion saying, this is what we think we can achieve with the new sets of purposes that is evolving in mind. So that's very important, to set the higher purpose in place. So we're not negotiating against each other. We're negotiating to achieve that higher purpose. I have some suggestions. I will certainly like to hear it from you. So it's important to make a proposal saying, this is what I would like to do. This is what I would like to do in order to us to get there. And then, of course, you listen. You have to listen. You have to be more empathetic, because they have to also learn to process what you just given them. And it just takes time for them to share that with you. And you have to be open to that. Okay. And this is, it's easy to say, but it's hard to do. But the only way to do it is to practice it. And the best place to start is to start with yourself and be ready to integrate when you bring the other party on board.
Yeah. Thank you for all the tips here. And just want to ask you lastly also, if someone who's listening have a difficult conversation coming up, any tips for them on the mindset they should have and prepare themselves?
It's important to understand that if you haven't been clear on your intention, in other words, you have thought through what's important to you, why it's important, and how you're going to get it done. If you haven't done that inner work and you start to have the conversation, it's highly likely that you're going to use negotiating skills as a manipulation. You will try to manipulate the other party to get what you want. Negotiation is not about manipulation, right? It's about alignment, because you are genuinely interested in hearing the other party, hearing their concerns, their issues, whilst you have your own. You're genuinely interested. So you have a lot of empathy, because you're kind of like trying to be them. Once you be them, then you understand why is it that they are sharing this, are concerned about that. Why do they think, why do they disagree with what I'm trying to do? As long as they understand there is a higher purpose and your intention is for us to get there, then that creates more trust. They were more likely to be honest with you, to tell you exactly what their issues are. And sometimes you may not be able to resolve those issues. Maybe you start with a few of the issues that you can resolve. So you start to close the gap. And then you revisit. They're saying, now that we've gone a little bit further together, seems to be working well, Why don't we go for the next phase? The next phase. So you don't have to do all the problem solving through negotiation at once. Sometimes you break it down and start with the easiest ones. So you create momentum of trust, momentum of empathy. They can also start seeing cadence being built because you already had that cadence in your mind. That's why you're keen to share it with them. Now you've got more alignment on how the cadence is built jointly. So you're resolving the higher purpose together rather than announcing it to the other party, which is the kind of mistakes I used to make. I used to say, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm off. Okay. That just creates huge amount of resentment, gives the other party the sense that they've been left behind, creates a loneliness, even fear for them. That's not what you want. If your objective is to stay in the relationship, you have to bring them along, okay? Because they are part of your solution. And one of the best ways to create that is to create that bridge from me versus we.
Okay, love all the tips here today. Thank you so much, Sanjay, for coming on the show to talk about negotiations, not only for business, but also how to make us happier and healthier, and also even sort out our relationships. So thank you, Sanjay. Any final note, any last message or anything that you want to leave with the listeners before I let you go?
I would say that use negotiating skills because it's around us all the time. We're always in conflict, whether we realize it or not. So conflict, as I said, sounds very dramatic, but it's disagreements. We're having disagreements in our corporate life. We're having disagreements in our community. We're having disagreements in our family and friends. Recognize that negotiating is an opportunity to create the bridge, right? If you have the courage to have done the inner work, you understood what you want, it's negotiation that gives you the structure to get it done, right? So use that as an opportunity to say, look, I understand these conflicts. I know why I need to resolve them. But let me understand how we resolve. And it is that bridge that you use, which is negotiation. And it's a very useful life skill. As I said, it's a human skill. So you can use it anytime you want, provided you don't use it as a manipulation, but as an alignment technique.
Thank you for that, Sanjay. And thank you for coming on the show to talk about negotiations today. And I want to thank all the listeners as well, and have a great rest of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you.